And it would be good if Poland were a leader in forging a sustainable European policy toward Russia.
As the Russian invasion of Ukraine continues, the world watches a nation at the crossroads. Poland stands as a steadfast partner in supporting Ukraine, offering logistical support and sanctuary for Ukrainian refugees. Yet, domestically, questions arise as Poland's democratic foundations appear to waver.
The problem was that the Law and Justice Party couldn't decide whether it wanted to lead Europe to unite around a policy of resisting Russian aggression or whether it wanted to fight with the EU and with the Germans.
Since 2015, Poland's conservative Law and Justice Party has faced criticism for challenging democratic norms. Recent parliamentary elections in Poland may determine whether the nation remains a democracy or follows the illiberal path of countries like Hungary and Turkey. This is Global Insights by Network 2020. Today, we're joined by Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council and former Ambassador to Poland, Daniel Fried, who will answer some critical questions. Why does the election matter beyond Poland's borders?
A new government, if it can manage to settle these things, can elevate Poland's role in Europe to be a leader on Europe's principal security challenge, which is Russian aggression.
How might the election results affect Poland's standing in NATO and the EU?
That would be a good thing for the United States. It would be a good thing for NATO, be a good thing for Europe, and probably a good thing for Poland.
And what are the implications for the United States, a long-standing ally?
They're far from unhappy with the election results, but they're going to play it straight.
Moderating the discussion is Joanna Gładczewski.
First, I wanted to just say what an honor it is to be moderating this conversation with Ambassador Fried tonight. I was a Facel Fellow in the early 1990s at our embassy in Warsaw, and I was able to work with Ambassador Fried at that time, covering Polish domestic politics. And it's led to a lifelong fascination and interest in Polish domestic politics. So I'm very grateful to have had that opportunity to serve with you at that time. First, if I could ask you, please, to set the scene about Polish political development since the fall of communism, since 1989, up to the elections this past weekend. I know it's a big chunk of time, but if you could please give us just a very brief history.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. Polish politics are fascinating, but the background, the arc of Polish history is that since 1989, the Poles have been successful, astonishingly so for the many skeptics. And Poles themselves, if you ask them, will acknowledge that the generation since 1989 has been the best, most successful generation, either in Polish history or since the early 17th or late 16th century. The Polish security, Polish politics, and Polish economics were all moving in the right direction. And this is through governments that came after the fall of communism in 1989. Some of those governments were right-wing, some were left-wing, some were liberal, some were weird coalitions. But all of them, without exception, advanced the notion of a democratic Poland with a free market economy embedded in European and transatlantic structures, meaning NATO and the EU. And they did it. They actually succeeded. Polish GDP has either tripled or quadrupled since 1989. It was in 1989 a poor country. Poland is no longer a poor country. It's got poor people in it, but it is not a poor country. And this is to the credit of Poles. The Americans, the Europeans helped, EU membership has helped, but the heavy lifting was done by the Poles, and the economic turnaround came well before Polish accession to the EU. That happened in 2004, but the economy, starting in the mid-90s, was growing rapidly, frankly, for several years at Chinese levels of growth, but without Chinese authoritarianism. So this is a good news story. Now, I mentioned that Poland had governments of right, left, center, and weird coalitions, and this is true. The Solidarity Coalition, however, that united Poles from left to right. Well, anti-communist social democrats on the left to Christian nationalists on the right were all united by an aversion to communism and a belief in democracy as the solution. That political coalition that Lech Wałęsa brought together broke up in the early 90s, and a lot of Polish politics has to do with the political tensions that came with that breakup. You basically have in Polish politics urban, more educated, more affluent, centrist, and liberal parties. And you have in the countryside and small towns a more conservative, traditionalist set of political assumptions. The Law and Justice Party has its base in the Polish countryside and small towns, and there are a lot of them. They won the election in 2016, 2015, freely and fairly, on a program that even the liberals acknowledged was pretty good. They are called right-wing, but Polish political categories don't quite fit American ones. They believe in a much more active state role in the economy, and they believe in supporting working class and less affluent Poles, and they won the election partly because they had a plan to do that. But in power, they also veered to the right on cultural issues. They pressed basically a nationwide abortion ban. They leaned on the judiciary to try, critics say, to politicize it, got into a fight with the EU. They turned the state-run television network into really a pretty non-credible pro-government propaganda organ. And I've watched it, and it's not like BBC. It's not an independent television network. And they use state-owned companies to try to buy out a lot of local media and change the editorial line. So all of these developments, which were core to the way the Law and Justice Party won elections, triggered a reaction among the political base of their opponents. And the turnout in the last elections was a record high 74+%. That was enormous. And the turnout was largely driven by people in the urban centers who voted out of fear that the Law and Justice Party was moving Poland in a right-wing authoritarian direction. And I mentioned the earlier successful Law and Justice campaign because there were a lot of things the Law and Justice Party did and Law and Justice governments did in Poland that was pretty successful. They were competent stewards of the economy. The critics will say they packed the state-owned enterprises with political cronies, but a lot of those state-run enterprises were fairly effectively run. Polish growth continued. The prime minister is a competent, current prime minister, outgoing presumably, is a competent economic manager. So the Polish government, the Polish governing party lost because it veered to the hard right on social issues and alarmed Poles. Their rhetoric was divisive. Jarosław Kaczynski, the head of the Law and Justice Party, made enemies he didn't have to make. In terms of foreign policy, the Polish government supported Ukraine. They are opponents of Putin and his aggression. They work well with the United States. Their policy on Ukraine was actually magnificent. Polish society took in, from right to left, took in millions of Ukrainian refugees into their homes. Poland has been the base of support for weapons to American, Polish, German, French, other weapons to Ukraine. But they also picked fights with Germany for political reasons to appeal to their base. And these fights didn't do Poland any good. We have a Russia problem. Poland, the US, all of Europe has a Putin problem. There was no good reason for Poland to pick fights with Germany. Polish arguments were roughly, World War II, they owe us reparations. And the German policy toward Russia has been too soft. On the first, this is bashing the Germans and calling them basically an enemy of the Polish people is not a good way to resolve historical issues. And secondly, the Germans did, in fact, have a lot of mistaken assumptions about Russia. They were much too hopeful. The Poles were right about Russia. The Germans were wrong about Russia. And if you ask the Germans privately, they will acknowledge it. But this was a time for Poland to say to the Germans, look, it doesn't matter what you did before. You all know now that you were mistaken. Let's together forge a sustainable European policy toward Russia. But this was hard because the Polish government was picking fights. All right, so that's the election. Now, there's not a new government. There won't be a new government for many weeks. The Law and Justice Party came in first. It doesn't apparently have enough seats to form a government, but it does have the chance to get the first chance to try. The Polish president, Andrzej Duda, was not up for re-election. He's going to be president for until 2025, I think. He is within his rights to offer Law and Justice the first chance to form a government. They will try. Jarosław Kaczynski has serious political skills. He's very good as an inside fighter, and before he admits defeat, he may try to peel off delegates from the opposition coalition, which is a disparate coalition. It includes centrist parties, the Peasant Party, leftist parties, and the big Liberal Party. He's going to try to peel off votes. He will try to foment dissension within the opposing coalition, and maybe he will succeed. It doesn't look like he will, but you can't ever rule it out. So don't expect a new government soon, but a new government is more likely than not. And it has every chance of succeeding if they can manage to come up with ways not to waste their political capital seeking revenge or ignoring the economy. Anyway, I've gone on for too long. I apologize for that, but you asked me, Joanna, to give a history of Poland since 1989, so I've done my best, and I will now shut up and answer questions, yours or anybody else's.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Ambassador. You did that admirably because it's a lot to cover. My question to you is, what are going to be some of the challenges for the likely new coalition government, and what are going to be some of the opportunities? What will they be able to accomplish in the short term very quickly? And what are going to be some of the challenges that they'll face President Duda and also the entrenched nature of some of the peace activities and changes that they made over 8 years?
Well, first, there's a war in Ukraine, and that war is going to color the context in which any Polish government acts. We don't know how the war will end. Will Ukraine's offensive pick up momentum? Will it not? Will there be some push for a settlement? Will Ukraine continue to resist? There are 1 million Ukrainian refugees in Poland right now. The war is very expensive, including for Poland. The Poles are giving enormous amounts of aid to Ukraine, and it's a stress. Ukrainian workers in Poland are a net plus for the economy, and there are a lot of them. There were a lot before the war. So that's the big issue. In terms of domestic politics, the new government is going to have to deal with the media. How do they unwind what they consider to be the law and justice manipulation of the media? Are they going to fire all the political appointees at state-run companies? If they do so, are they going to risk a break in management? Because a lot of these companies are decently run. It's not as if it doesn't work. Polish economy is in pretty good shape. Will they be able to reform the judiciary? I mean, undo the reforms of the judiciary in a way that is practical? Will they try to go after their opponents and seek revenge? Emotions are pretty high in Poland right now. Andrzej Duda the president has a reputation of being a relative moderate and reasonable voice. He vetoed one government law from the political camp that supported him, which he thought would go after the independent Polish television network, which the government thought had a liberal slant. And he said, no, we're not doing that. There's freedom of media, and besides, this network is owned by an American company, Discovery, so we're not going there. So he's been a figure many people in the opposition will grudgingly admit they have respect for. So we'll see what kind of a relationship he has with the new government, if and when that new government gets formed, and whether they work together or at loggerheads from the beginning. So a lot on the plate. Not easy. It's a disparate coalition, and it'll take some levels of political skill to make it work.
And who do you think would be the prime minister? Do you think it will be Donald Tusk? That's what's expected?
It really ought to be. His liberal civic platform party is by far the largest opposition party. He's been prime minister before. He was president of the European Council. He ran a successful campaign. If not, why not? He really has earned it. But he will have to satisfy his coalition partners, who will want serious ministries. There are a lot of them, and the coalition negotiations will not be easy because his party, the Civic Platform Party, it's called liberal, but in American terms, it would be closer to what we remember liberal Republicans were like. Moderate on social issues, big on the free market. It's not really a leftist party, but it's aligned with social democrats who did very well among urban Polish youth, and with the peasant party that's a patronage party for its electorate, which are Poland's many, many, many small farmers, and with something called Poland 2050, which is a centrist group headed by a pretty charismatic figure who did very well in the debates, Szymon Hołownia, who's going to want, his party his coalition with the peasant party did very well, and he's going to, want something for his role in being kingmaker.
It'll be
politics, right?
No, interesting how it all played out. And that leads me to my next question. Poland appears to have succeeded where Hungary and Turkey did not, meaning that the opposition did not unite under one party, but went into the elections with three different parties. Do you think this is specific to Poland's success? Do you think it's a model for other countries to adopt? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's an interesting question because the Hungarian opposition united around one candidate and they failed. The Poles Donald Tusk flirted with trying to get a united list, and it didn't work, and there was some scratchiness, which marred the beginning of their political campaign. But in the end, it turned out to work very well. Now, let's see whether Tusk can make this three-part coalition work. And he's going to do so under conditions where Law and Justice is going to be sniffing around. They're going to, I wouldn't be surprised if they targeted the peasant party and said, whatever the liberals are going to offer you, we'll do more. We'll do more for your constituency. We'll stay away from the farmers. We'll let you have that base. We'll see what works. The peasant party has had no love for Law and Justice because Law and Justice was going after their core constituency of the small farmers. But we'll see. It's politics. And like I said, Jarosław Kaczynski, the leader of Law and Justice, is no fool. He's very good, especially at inside ball politics.
That was my question to you. How can they make it, someone like Kaczynski and Law and Justice, how can they make it difficult for the new coalition government? What are some things that they can do to complicate their governing?
Well, under the Polish constitution, it's rather a complicated process to go from here to the next government. Law and Justice will probably get the first chance to form a government, at which point they will make offers to the nationalists, who didn't do well, but at some votes. They will probably approach the Peasant Party and offer all kinds of things to individual Peasant Party delegates to try to peel them away. And they will plant rumors, they will do press leaks about secret negotiations, try to sow mistrust between the coalition partners. And this, you have to expect this. This is politics. And if the three opposition parties can't handle this, then they probably don't deserve to form a government anyway. But expect some turmoil in the next few weeks.
Yeah, sounds familiar. Thank you.
Yeah, right?
At Global Insights, we're committed to providing you with thought-provoking content and insights that matter. We're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is made possible through the support of listeners like you. If you've been enjoying the discussions and perspectives we bring you, we kindly invite you to be a part of our mission. Visit network2020.org for more information. From all of us, thank you.
And now turning to foreign policy, Polish foreign policy, you had mentioned about European Union, Poland's relations with the European Union under peace, under law and justice. Can you discuss how you think now this will change with the likely opposition government?
Well, a colleague of mine, Alina Polyakova, and I wrote a piece that came out yesterday in Foreign Affairs where we addressed exactly this topic. And Poland is not a small country. It's not a poor country. And Poland is the natural leader among most of the Eastern tier countries of the European Union. And it's been proven right about Russia. Poland's has, and it would be good if Poland were a leader in forging a sustainable European policy toward Russia. They could do it. But they've been unable to do this. They've been unable to punch at their weight because of the fights with the EU and the distractions of fighting with the Germans. A new government, if it can manage to settle these things, can elevate Poland's role in Europe to be a leader on Europe's principal security challenge, which is Russian aggression. That would be a good thing for the United States. It would be a good thing for NATO, be a good thing for Europe, and probably a good thing for Poland. They can do this. It's not that the Law and Justice Party had a bad policy toward Ukraine and Poland, Ukraine and Russia. They had a fight over Ukrainian grain in Russia, but that would have been any Polish government. Any Polish government would have opposed that, especially the Peasant Party. The problem was that the Law and Justice Party couldn't decide whether it wanted to lead Europe to unite around a policy of resisting Russian aggression or whether it wanted to fight with the EU and with the Germans, which strikes me as a questionable decision. But you add in the government kind of national security people who had a Reagan-esque view, and we got along with them just fine. They did a good job. But there were also people for whom the culture wars and the fights in the judiciary and the fights with the Germans were basically their priority. And that was a problem. And now a new government can elevate Poland's role in Europe, which would be a good thing.
Yes, absolutely. And now Washington, which has been, the United States has been a longtime ally of Poland and supporter of Poland. How are they perceiving? How is Washington perceiving the change now, potential change with the new government, and where do they see things going as far as the future relations that Poland will have with its neighbors and with Russia, for example?
Sure. The Biden administration started off keeping some distance from the Polish government because of issues of press freedom, and the judiciary. There was even a view among some of the Biden people that Poland was like Hungary, that is, moving in an authoritarian direction. A lot of the Biden people who held this view didn't know a lot about Poland. The Biden people who did know Poland had a more nuanced view because Poland was nowhere near Hungarian levels of authoritarianism. When President Duda vetoed the law which was going after the independent television network in Poland, he opened the door to improve relations with the Biden administration, and he did so just a little bit before Putin started mobilizing against Ukraine. I give President Duda a lot of credit because by taking that step, he made it much easier for the Biden administration to embrace Poland as an ally against Russia's attack on Ukraine, and made it easier for the Biden administration to work with Poland in defense of Ukraine. I mean, it is a big deal. It's a major military logistics operation being mounted out of Poland. There are U.S. combat troops in Poland, a lot of soldiers, a lot of firepower. And we might have done this anyway, but it was a lot easier because of what Andrzej Duda did. The Biden administration would have been prepared to work with whatever government came. But they were aware, of course, of the more questionable elements of the Law and Justice government's political direction, the fights with Germans and the judiciary and the media and all that. And so they're far from unhappy with the election results, but they're going to play it straight. They didn't take sides. The U.S. ambassador in Poland didn't take sides. And it's important that the U.S. administration, whatever it is, not try to be a player in Polish politics or show favorites. But they will work fine with whatever government emerges.
So my next question is about how Russia perceives what's happening in Poland right now. And I know Poland traditionally has been anti-Russian. So that would have been true if Law and Justice, had won as well. But my question to you is what is Vladimir Putin's thoughts about this election, or he's just used to dealing with a Poland who is never very friendly towards them?
Well, it's, you can say that the Poles are anti-Russian, but in fact, the Russians had it coming. I mean, the Russians occupied most of Poland for most of the 19th century. They invaded Poland in an alliance with Hitler. At the end of World War II, instead of liberating Poland, they simply replaced Nazi occupation with their own. So, the Polish list of grievances against the Russians is long and it is accurate. Putin is history obsessed. And a lot of his animosity toward Poland, and he's got a lot, goes back also to the long fight between the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and Muscovy, mastery in Eastern Europe. And this is not generally known, but the Poles and the Russians were basically equals in terms of power for a couple of centuries, and the Poles might have come out on top. They lost some wars, they won some wars against the Russians, and the Russians remember this. Look, this is weird, but the Russian National Day celebrates the expulsion of the Polish garrison from Moscow in 1612. And probably you never knew that the Poles got to Moscow at all. But they did. They beat the Russians and they marched into Moscow and they held it for 2 years. Putin remind the world of that fact that the Poles just sort of don't think about very much. Putin wants to destroy Ukraine, and one of his nightmares in his kind of history-obsessed, weird imperial mentality, one of his fears is that Poland and Ukraine will form an alliance. And a lot of Poles, looking back on their history, realize that the reason they lost to the Russians was because they never were able to manage to work things out with the Ukrainian Cossacks, Had they done so, they probably would have beaten the Russians, and history would be different, but they never managed it. So the Ukrainian Cossacks, mad at the Poles, sided with the Russians and got swallowed up by Muscovy. Right? This is all history. But you asked what Putin sees when he looks at Poland, and I'm telling you that's what he sees. And if you think I'm making it up, Putin has written like weird historical articles about all of this stuff, as if his objective is to reestablish the Russian Empire. So he's going through all of these old fights. I mean, that's just bizarre. Every European country had its empire, right? I mean, everybody just every European country was once larger than it is now. Get over it. But he can't. And, this happily, our topic is not Russia, but it is for the Russians, a strong Poland is a nightmare. It shouldn't be. The Poles are not going to march into Kyiv. They're not going to march into Moscow. But Putin hates the idea of a strong Poland. Anyway, I've gone on, but you asked the question. So I want to give a little more depth than you'll get, in newspaper articles.
No, absolutely. Thank you for that. That is fascinating, actually. My next question to you is, do you think the Polish election perhaps has stemmed this tide of toward autocratic governments? We saw just 2 weeks ago Robert Fico in Slovakia, who's right-wing, pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian, win the election there. And of course, we have Viktor Orban in Hungary. So do you think the Polish election now might actually kind of stem that tide, or is it an aberration? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's not just Central or East European politics that is divided along liberal and nationalist lines. That's true throughout Europe. I mean, what was Brexit? Or the French right, or the Alternative for Deutschland, which is a pretty nasty right-wing party. So that line goes through all Western countries, including the United States. All right. And American politics is not our topic, but I think you know what I'm talking about. The Polish election doesn't show that liberal politics will always triumph. It shows that liberal politics can win an election. Let's see what they do with it. A lot of my Polish friends are saying they're proud of their country. Well, okay, that's great, and they should be. Let's see if the new government can, step up to expectations and vindicate what the Polish people have decided. We'll see. I mean, they have a lot of talent and a lot of opportunity, and I really wish them the best.
Yes, I think we probably all do. My final question to you is to ask if you could please share some, memories, events, most interesting observations, anything that you really have appreciated from your postings in Poland.
Well, I've been working on Polish issues since 1987, and I have a whole set of memories associated with the near universal view in Washington that Poland would not succeed. It wouldn't succeed in overthrowing communism, and if it did that, it wouldn't succeed in fixing the economy. And Poles in the early 90s, and you remember this, didn't think that were worried that they couldn't do it either. It looked impossible. Overthrowing communism? The communists had all the guns. How are you going to do that? Most of official Washington thought it was impossible. And when they did, official Washington thought that the Polish economy would never be fixed. It was irreparably broken. But they did it. They really did it. They outnegotiated the communists. They managed a peaceful transition from communism. And then they invested, what one Polish leader at the Times told me is that we invested the political capital of liberation into the economy. And they did it. And Lech Wałęsa gets enormous credit for this. He used his political capital to protect the economic reformers and give them the time for their reforms to work. And they did work. I mean, it was a rough ride, but they worked. And I remember thinking at the time, of course the Poles will succeed. Because this generation of Poles, the leaders of these early post-Solidarity governments, were carrying the responsibility of every Polish uprising against the Russians and the Nazis for over a century. And now it was their turn, and they would not let themselves fail. I knew it. So they won't let themselves fail. They are going to be Poland's greatest generation. They'll be like the founding fathers in the United States, who also, by the way, broke up into angry political factions in the 1790s and were fighting with each other terribly. All the signers of the Declaration of Independence throwing rocks at each other politically in a few years. But look what they did. I remember watching the Polish economy turn around. You could feel it. New stores, new restaurants, new construction. And I thought, this is the best thing ever. This is the best thing ever. Because the Poles were destroyed in World War II, right? Just the Germans went after them in a way that was horrific. Polish Jews were sentenced to death. Polish Catholics were shot and slaughtered by, the thousands. And yet they managed, they went through all that. Anyway, look, those are just some thoughts. It was, best thing ever. And, if Polish politics is rough, like whose is it? But it's rough on the basis of a generation of a near miracle. And I respect that enormously.
Well, thank you so much. That's a wonderful note to end it on.
We can't thank you enough for being a part of this episode of Global Insights. To dive deeper into the world of insightful analysis and to learn more about how you can join our community, visit us at network2020.org.